Welcome everyone to SIS Startup Impact Summit, day one, first talk on international and GBA stage. GBA stage stands for Greater Bay Area. So yes, we have our own Bay Area now here as well. I am super thrilled. We could not kick off the stage with a better talk than the one that Matthieu and the amazing panel with Rachel, Marian, and Luyi are representing when they're going to talk about innovation the China way. And I'll hand it over to Matthieu. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Karina. Hello, and thank you for joining a webinar on innovation the Chinese way. We have 45 minutes together with Luyi, Marian, and Rachel, and we will discuss about the differences and opportunities to be found with the startup and innovation landscape in China. My name is Matthieu. I am the COO at geoFluxus, a clean tech startup that maps waste. I am based in Amsterdam since April, but had been in Greater China for the past 9 years. I worked with entrepreneurs and innovators at Xnode and Techstars and became fascinated with the idea that to understand and appreciate how innovation happens in China, we would need to look beyond the Western methods. For example, beyond the lean startup that originated in the US. We will have a great conversation together with Rachel, partner and China GM at Fabernovel. Fabernovel support multinationals in their digital transformation through digital consultancy, upskilling, marketing, and technology. Their clients include world leaders like LVMH, Richemont, Kering, Shiseido, L'Oreal, and so many more. But she has also been a serial entrepreneur. She was part of the China Accelerator Batch 11 with her startup, Lihaoma. And she is actively engaged with the Shanghai tech ecosystem, both as president at IPWS and as co-director of the Startup Grind Shanghai chapter. She's an exceptional startup mentor, and she has been part of the Forbes 30 under 30 list. She has been living in China for the past 10 years. We will also have Luyi. Luyi is a native Chinese that was born and grown up in Shanghai. And at the age of 26, she decided to take on a new adventure and left her career in the luxury industry to move to France without speaking a French word. In the past years, Luyi has been working with a large French company, leading the open innovation at a global level based from Paris. And this experience has brought her close to the startup ecosystem and corporate innovation landscape. Recently, she took the courage to re-challenge herself again, to follow her growing passion for connecting the two homes, China and France. And she now focuses on helping French brand startups and investment funds make their China-related businesses easier. And finally, we'll hear from Marian, a serial entrepreneur with a passion for innovation and technology. Marian is the founder and CEO of wehustle, a platform for innovators that started from Shanghai. Marian is working on building and aggregating resources much needed for the ecosystem players to grow in China. He has been working and partnering up with 20 plus tech entrepreneurs and tech communities in China, and that created the desire to run and launch TechCom Conference, an annual event celebrating the power of communities. He has been 8 years in China, which helped him deeply understand the grassroots startup ecosystem. And he is, like our other panelists, a great speaker, mentor to startups, and panelist. Now, to get started, I would love to ask Rachel to share with us and briefly explain what is the lean startup and how it became in China such a prevalent method to innovate.
Thank you so much, Matthieu. Wow, what an intro. It's really great to be speaking about Lean Startup because actually the moment that I discovered Lean Startup completely changed the way that I operated my startup. And I've been able to teach this at university, and now I support, corporates to implement the method for their own innovation. And in a nutshell, Lean Startup is a methodology for innovating that was born in the US about 10 years ago. and was mostly popularized by an author called Eric Ries that created the book The Lean Startup. And basically, the problem that Lean Startup is trying to solve is that most of the time, 99% of the startups that fail because they create products that nobody really wants. And so the goal of Lean Startup is to reduce as much waste as possible in your product and in your product development roadmap so that you build a product that people actually want with only the features that are truly valuable for your users. And so it's a methodology in 3 steps: build, measure, learn. And it's very, very valuable for founders or for corporates that are wanting to innovate with new products, because it helps you to first identify one of your hypotheses. So for example, value hypothesis, what kind of problems users are facing, or a business model hypothesis, what kind of monetization could I have for this project? Then build what we call a minimum viable product, which is a very, very tiny version of the product that only has the most critical functionalities that you can then launch on the market, gather data in order to make decision for the next experiment. So it's a very, very closed loop, short cycle, iterative way to build a product and make sure that you're building something that people are ready to use and to actually pay for. And I think that it's became a very prevalent development method in China because Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese people in general are extremely pragmatic, and they are very used to doing incremental innovation. And so I think that that aspect of the Lean Startup really resonated super well with the innovation culture that was already implemented in the country.
Thank you very much for sharing. Marian, maybe you can jump in and share. When you are a founder in China, starting your venture, typically what is your state of mind? What are your concerns? What are your worries?
Thank you very much, Matthieu, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel. Well, I think when it comes to founders in China, basically we have some common worries and obstacles that everyone is experiencing. It's about the great ideas to have. It's about how innovative you are. It's about finding the right partners, right? It's about how quick you are. But I think when it comes to more details, and if we divide China founders into 2 chunks, we're going to talk about a little bit about Chinese founders in China and foreign founders in China. So when it comes to Chinese founders in China, I think they have, on top of the challenges that I already mentioned, it's all about the speed. Everyone heard about the China speed. And if you're not quick enough, so I think it's going to be the really tough game to play. So that's all of them worry about how fast they move. So the second thing I think it's worth to point out is about the right ecosystem partner. We know about the Alibaba, we know about Tencent, we know about Meituan, we know about ByteDance. So those are ecosystems that are very inclusive, and choosing the right ecosystem partner to grow your business is extremely important, because once you're already there, then you can be propelled, and then you have all the support along the way to grow your business. And I think recently what we see more and more that lots of Chinese tech companies are trying to go abroad, and they experience exactly the same challenges as the foreign companies have in China. So how to go abroad, how to scale. So that are the challenge, I think, that bothering them at the moment. So when it comes to foreign founders here in China, I think that list is quite long. On top of the challenges that have been already mentioned, we can add something like, not many people are talking about it, but future insecurity. And when I talk about the future insecurity, because with the not stable situation in the world, you're not sure if your business will stay in China for another 5-10 years. We are talking about even like 1 or 2 years. So you never know, and you cannot control this situation. I think this is in your DNA to take the risk and just keep moving to build until you can. The second thing may be kind of trivial, but still very crucial to understand and to embrace the language and the cultural barriers. So I think it's extremely important to be in China, to live in China, to understand the cultures and the people. So that would definitely help business to scale. Also, foreign founders, I think they experience limited resources or the accessibility to the resources that are available in the market. Probably it's not exactly the same as for local people, for sure. And definitely we can talk a little bit about the regulatory issues, that not all businesses are available for foreign founders to run here in China. And of course, that is the challenge that we experience. So the list can go on, but I think this is the few of them that we can definitely focus on first and to tackle them.
Sorry, having these big trends in mind, Luyi, would you be able to jump in and share what are the consequences when it comes to actually innovating, having some of the things that Marian shared?
Yes. So actually, based on what Marian had said, so firstly, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's incredible that we're from different places of the world and we're talking about and share about the same insights of how to innovate in the Chinese way. So from my perspective, as a Chinese working in a French context, it naturally gives me this like observation to see how does French or Europeans innovate differently from Chinese. And very agree with what Marian has said, that we do it in a quick and a rapid way. We evolve so fast. And I think there are like 5 fundamental reasons why we could do that, or why we could make it happen. Is first that Chinese startups tend to be very close or dig into the national development initiatives. For example, one of the startups that we've worked with before, which is a basketball training and court brand from Hangzhou, and they link them together very closely with the Asian Games 2022 that is happening in Hangzhou very soon. And they connect themselves with Alibaba, as Marian said, on the sports initiatives to develop themselves in terms of branding, consumer base, and what they can bring in terms of higher value to the consumers. So, and this goes to the second point of Chinese founders are very into solve real life problems. So they will observe in a real life situation and see what's the gap that they could fill in. Instead, in France, I feel like we do a lot of research, benchmark. We have a lot of methodologies like lean startup, like design thinking. It's great for the planning phase. However, Chinese startups or Chinese founders are less likely to go through these processes, but they are more focused on what type of solution they can really bring to make the consumer's life easier. The third one, I would say, Chinese founders are very agile to transfer something from another market to Chinese market. So one of the startups I've worked with, which is a cloud kitchen startup, they've grown very rapidly in the past several years. The founder actually worked in a large FIC in China in food industry. However, during his study trip in Singapore, he saw this cloud kitchen example where restaurants rent a small space to, you know, do their food and do delivery. And he was like, we don't have this in China, we don't have this in Shanghai, and I think this will really bring efficiency and convenience to local consumers. Why don't we do it? So he quit the job and he started the startup journey, which is very great and develops very fastly. And the fourth one would be like Chinese startups tend to have very deep network in respective industries. For example, a startup I've worked with in the digital heart attack monitor industry, they are already working with Sanofi or Philips to distribute their products. Even when they are still building this prototype or pilot, they're already in the phase of contract negotiation, partnership possibilities for long term. So they do everything in parallel to really catch up the speed of competition. And the last one, I would say, like, Chinese founders work hard and work a lot. We tend to work, out of the 9 to 5 routine, and we are happy about it. So we don't complain, and we connect this personal passion of entrepreneurial journey with the time we spend on the project.
Yeah, and if I can jump in here, I love the way that you articulated your answer. It's really fantastic, and on every single point I can totally relate and see that absolutely. And finally, on the last point, I think maybe some of the audience may not have heard of the 996, which is a widely debated topic here, which is the idea that you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And then I was at Alibaba a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, no, we are 007, so we work from midnight to midnight, 7 days per week. So it's kind of a big topic for conversation. That is it's a benchmark. In reality, most entrepreneurs here work those hours, but it's really interesting to see that things are a little bit changing as well, because, for example, when we hire some of our employees, they ask us about 996, and they're like, is this something that's done in your company? And that's one of the first questions that they ask, because I think it's starting to change a little bit as well. But it's true that they're extremely result focused. They're all about delivery, and incremental innovation, incremental change. I think that some of the startups that we work with, for example, one startup that I really admire, that's called Black Lake, which is basically a middleware that's working with factories to help connect the workers' mobile phone together with the big ERP that are used in the factories. They release a new version every week. So they have a new version of the product coming out every week. And this is not an isolated case. Even the large companies like WeChat on the mini programs, they are releasing on a weekly basis, for example. So we really see like this level of pressure and speed is really a reality. And that also means that I think one thing that's particular about the Chinese way to innovate is that they aren't scared to release a product that is far from being perfect, that is probably buggy and missing half of the features, because what matters is how fast you can adapt to the response you get from the market. And even though, Chinese entrepreneurs may not say, oh, I use Lean Startup methodology, the reality is that they are actually the masters of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great concept, and Marian talks a lot about living in beta and skipping the MVP. Can you share about typically how Chinese entrepreneurs would typically structure their time so they maintain this speed of releasing extremely quickly?
Right. That's actually what partially already Rachel mentioned. Thank you for that to bring up. I think that's what how the market works over here. When I'm saying like skipping that MVP, it's not really skipping it, but it's not. So they basically take the MVP and put in the market, right? So there is no phase where you test with the relatives or friends or with the close group of people. They basically just put it in the market, in mass market, and see what happens. And they just keep improving all the time. So as long as MVP works, it has that button that brings you to the next page or open the service or whatever. It's good enough already. Nobody cares about how it looks. Is it beautiful or not? Do you want to adjust that extra button in the top left corner, make it bigger or smaller? They don't really pay attention to that thing unless it's crucial, it's important, and they can take the results after they already put it in the market. You remember the first mobile when they put in the street? Nobody knew what it is. It was something, just sitting there on the street, and people were curious about, and just, you see the QR code automatically. Okay, this is the QR code. I have to scan and see what happens next, right? So people start playing with this. And the app was really not look good, right? And it was something probably buggy as well, but nobody cares because they will fix it within a week if it works. So that's what means they kind of skip in MVP, or they always live in beta. And even if you look at the big companies right now, just a couple of days ago, I saw on the website of Luyi right? They just released the logo, AI logo. So basically you can just pay a bit of money and then algorithm generate the logo based on your colors and then desire. So, and again, it's better. You can see that they're testing. So this is something that gives you flexibility, it gives you speed. You don't spend a lot of time, like months, to build something that nobody wants. And this is kind of important, and they are okay if it's buggy. So I think this is very different from the rest, and it allows them just to move way faster.
I would love to add one more thing. And by the way, Marian, if you write a book one day, you should call it "Living in Beta." I think it's an awesome title. And to build on what you said, I identify two more things that I think are really prominent in this market when we talk about innovation. The first one is what you mentioned about pushing out the product and iterating very, very fast. And another thing that we see is that Chinese consumers are really okay having a basic service that's not very great, but they're also very used to paying a premium, maybe 2, 3, 5, 10 RMB to get a much better experience. And so you actually get with incremental revenue that's very low amount, individual amount, but at very large scale. And I'm thinking the best example for me is really Didi Chuxing, the Chinese Uber. That has, the baseline car is really, really average. And then you have, I think, 4 levels of upgrade. So that means that you could get maybe any type of experience that you're looking for, including having like a super luxurious, huge van that has a KTV inside. So, and that's just on the normal app. This idea that you can have a very low quality product and low quality service, but that people are ready to pay a little bit of money in order to upgrade. And that generates big revenue for those companies. So that was one of the main thing I wanted to share.
Yeah, like just
go for it. Sorry.
Jumping on top of that, because this is a great input on the consumer services landscape in China, because we have like so many super apps like WeChat, like Daydou, as you guys were saying, in Chinese market. So maybe a suggestion for foreign startups that want to step into Chinese market. If you want to, compete in the B2C market, it can be very fierce. It can burn you a lot of money, your fundings. So finding a way, switch or adapt your business model or your product from a B2C perspective to B2B perspective, working with local corporates, large corporates, industry leaders would be another way to win China market for foreign startups, in my perspective. And we have good examples about this. Like there's a French founder of the Care Voice. He established his very successful startup in Shanghai. It was B2C at the very beginning to do review and monitor of medical services in China. But then now he's so successful in the B2B field, working with large insurance companies. He switched himself to healthcare startup, to insurtech startup, which now is already in the Series A funding stage. So for me, this is really, one of maybe the biggest input that we can provide to foreign startups want to go to China, that change your playground in this market, and you will probably touch base your consumer much easier and with much less cost.
I would like to take this opportunity to switch to a slightly different topic. So we've talked a lot about what happens with startups. Luyi, can you share a little bit from your experience and what you've observed? What are the consequences for large companies that want to innovate with startups in China?
Okay. Great question. I think I've seen big wave and evolvement in China in terms of this topic. Maybe 5 years ago, when I started my last role in the French corporate on open innovation part, every big French company in their headquarters, they're working, basically 3 big initiatives like internal innovation. This is a bottom-up innovation processes that you collect ideas, you give ideas and processes to bring the ideas of your employees into reality. Second is open innovation. You open up your company working with startups, incubators, accelerators, venture capitals, etc., or universities and R&D labs to really bring the external blood into your company. The third is venture capital, corporate venture capital, where the corporate set up a fund and invest in early stage or growing stage startups. And literally in maybe 2 years ago, I see a big wave, and this practice has been introduced highly in China. In Shanghai, for FYCs established in Shanghai, and I'm sure that Rachel has also a point to say here, and I'm sure that there's a lot of companies working in Shanghai. They're looking for this kind of collaboration, and I think we've done a lot, and we've gone through a very good path in terms of changing the mindset of management team and employees from doing things to learning by doing, which is a way of how startup collaborates and make their journey successful. But still, we still have a long way to go, because normally what we see the open innovation or startup corporate collaboration stops at a great group photo in front of a backdrop of startup challenge, etc., good communication. I think we are now moving to the second phase of how we can really concretely develop this collaboration and partnership between startup and corporates. Is corporate venture capital the only way to do that? We see a lot of successful stories on how the international, the siege, the headquarter comes with a investment ticket to a local startup. But is the local team are able to do this by themselves to really drive the innovation to be implemented without any investment? I think this is where we need to focus from now on and make the innovations happen with the people in your company and the startup out of your company.
So, Rachel, obviously, we'd love to hear what's your take on this. I would love for you to also highlight what you see as differences with what your colleagues are doing in Europe and in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what Luyi shared is so thoughtful. So I totally concur with your analysis that we are entering a second phase of maturity of startup and corporate relations in China. One thing that is very outstanding, I would say, from Chinese groups is that they have a tendency to innovate from the inside. And I'm going to use a very well-known example, which is the example of Tencent, that was the leader in social network services with QQ, and that disrupted themselves by creating WeChat, and is now the biggest social networking system in China. So the big corporates in China are used to innovating and disrupting themselves from the inside. Now, what we see, one thing that's very special about the Chinese market is that more than 45% of all the VC money that's invested in startup in China is coming from the BAT. Is coming from Daydou, Alibaba, Tencent. If you compare with the US, is only 7% of venture capital that is coming from the GAFA, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. So we have a very different market. What it means is that the VC market in the US is much more structured and is much more mature than it is in China, where most of the innovation investment is driven either by the BAT or by the government through incubation, acceleration, and just local funds. And actually, the Chinese government has been pushing for innovation at scale in the past years by putting a very, very large influx of money at every level of the government. So from the national level, provincial level, city level, and even quarter level, in order to support the blossoming of those grassroots entrepreneurs coming up. So as we are talking about startup and corporate collaborations, I would say totally agree. We're entering a second phase where it's much more integrated, where we're seeing corporates imitating startups and trying to integrate startups in order to absorb that culture. I think the big mindset shift that has happened in the past couple of years is that corporates have understood that innovation is a mindset that you need to build within your organization. And so that's why most of them are now doing trainings around agile, around lean startup design thinking in order to foster this innovation. But that they also need to set up the processes that will allow for a certain level of autonomy and responsibility for their employee to feel like they own this project, and that they will, own this project if the project is successful. So I think those are a couple of the big shift that we see in the startup and corporate relation globally. How does it happen differently in China and in the rest of the world? I would say that the US is very mature on the topic, and you have very large corporate VCs that are getting used to investing into startups. You have a very mature VC ecosystem, and thus you have a very mature accelerator ecosystem. We can see it with Techstars, YC. I mean, those guys are really, really powerful. In Europe, it's very timid still, the collaborations between startups and big groups. And I think we're still on the first phase most of the time, where it's mostly about communication, employee engagement, but it's not truly yet a very, very strong strategy of pivoting and adaptation. And in China, we're entering the second phase where we're seeing a lot more integrations between startups and corporates.
That's very interesting. And I remember, right, when we were having these conversations with entrepreneurs, they were typically telling us, look, as soon as I'm going to launch my first version, the market is going to get created and it's going to become very, very intense. And so I see partnering up with a large company as an opportunity to take some shortcut, but also stand up from the competition. Because if I was able to work with them, it shows that I have something special. Marian, from your experience, what does it mean to work with a company when you're a Chinese startup? Is it what I've suggested, or are there other angles to look into?
Well, definitely work with the bigger companies is always a plus. It helps you to build up some branding, some reputation around your startup. It's not easy task. It requires lots of efforts. And what I noticed myself being here in China and trying to build something from the ground up, it takes enormous amount of efforts. And one of the things that actually helps is, work with the big companies, but also being present on the market all the time. So that helps, because what I see as well, lots of smaller startups popping up all the time around, but they don't last. And I think this kind of thing that actually not helping to build the trust towards the foreign companies here in China from local players. So that's why one thing that being around and being always present, and people can see you, that you're still doing things and you keep going on, that helps. And after doing things for 3-4 years, then it's getting very easier to come and talk to new players, because they can see that you've been here around, and then you have some partnerships. Yeah, so definitely working with big companies help, but it's not an easy task. It's not an easy task.
And when you look at the large company side, Luyi, and when you were working with Chinese founders, what were the type of things that you discovered that you've learned from the relationship, the connections?
Well, I would say, first of all, it was a very genuine and very authentic relationships. I think we both learn from each other. Like we've worked with very early stage startup or a bunch of PhD students just out of top engineering university. They're building an AI solution, and they have no idea what and how business world operates. This is where big corporate can really bring them values and tell them, okay, we do have a framework in project management, in partnership. You have to think about IT security, legal perspective, financial, business model, etc., etc. However, for us, what we've learned is how agile they are, how responsive they are in terms of deliver on the technology part, how engaged they are in terms of testing their technology in our corporate environment. So we are learning together, and I still remember when the startup came to France, visit us during Vivatech, and also do the integration of their technology in France. The founder was telling me, you know what, I've learned so much in this journey with corporates. And sometimes I feel like corporate people or employees were becoming more and more modest in a way that we cannot compete with startups. They are really outpacing us. But no, it's actually not true. I would say, okay, in terms of technology and agility, they're probably in a lot of aspects they're doing better than us. But big corporates could sustain its growth, and there's a reason. And the reason is because of their people, because of the engagement, because of the willingness to learn. So I think we really could gain a lot of nutrition from each other. So this is the first thing. Second thing is like Rachel was saying that in China, for example, Tencent and Alibaba are the biggest drivers of internal innovation go out. But for, let's say, traditional companies who does consumer services, who does consumer products, or in luxury industries, they are thirsty for technologies to drive their transformation. They are thirsty for technologies to really enhance the consumer experience of the product and the service they deliver. So this is where the startups can come in and bring in the new blood to the corporates. And the third part I would say like after the COVID-19 crisis globally, I'm sure more and more Chinese companies and global companies as well will focus much more on people well-being, healthcare, on the sustainability of our planet. So the startups who are working in this area, there's a chance and there's an opportunity for you guys really to play a role here, especially in China, because we are sort of late in these areas, and we do need this gap of knowledge or gap of best practices in the Western world to come to China and help us to understand and implement the importance of work-life balance and work-life success.
That's a very interesting, these are excellent points. I also see this very much as a two-way street, right? I think the rest of the world has so much to learn with what's happening. And I think these are services that Fabernovel put in place for large companies. Rachel, can you share if the Chinese tech ecosystem is learning all of these things that Luyi mentioned from the rest of the world? What is the rest of the world looking for when they come and visit and meet with Chinese founders?
Yeah, so we have the chance to help some of the biggest executive committee of biggest companies to come to China and be immersed in the ecosystem and meet with the entrepreneurs and the founders that are making history right here. Pre-COVID, we were welcoming 2 to 3 delegations per month, so we did a lot. I think that what they are looking for are mainly 3 things. So first of all, the development of China and the technology development of China has completely taken them by surprise in the past 5 years. And I think that most of them are, as they are coming to China, they see that something's happening, it's moving, it's shaking a lot, but they don't fully grasp it until they're in the middle of Shanghai and they see people using their phone for everything, including payment and ordering food and things like that. And that's only the moment where they feel the vibration of the city that they can really understand that something historic is happening here. And I think that what they are looking for are mainly three things. The first one is understand how they can have, how there can be such a strong entrepreneurial spirit in China, and what makes Chinese entrepreneur so ruthless, so efficient, so agile, and so fast. And so it comes back to a lot of the things that we have mentioned before around the mindset, the capacity of living in beta, like Marian was saying, which is a very cultural trait, but is widely supported. And I think that's the second question that they have is, how do you create an ecosystem or an environment that advocates so much for innovation and entrepreneurship, that everybody is doing it, and that you have extremely tech savvy consumers, digital savvy consumers, and that it actually just works and creates a vast amount of wealth for the country. And over there, what a lot of Westerners have difficulties to understand is that they consider China as a dictatorship, that where freedom is limited, and yet they see that there are a vast amount of innovation that is going on, and so they cannot make the connection. How is that possible, right? And I think that what we try to explain to them is the role of the government over here that is actively supporting innovation, both through some of the funding that I have mentioned before, and some of the plans that I've mentioned before, but also because of their attitude. And the government over here has a very much of a wait and see attitude. So, and the example of Mobike is beautiful. So we're going to let you try and push your product out on the market, even though there is no market and you are creating a market. We're going to observe how things are evolving, and then we're going to start and put laws onto that once we've identified what are the best practices and who are the players that we can actually collaborate with. And so this wait and see attitude gives a lot of potential for new things to appear. And I guess the third part is that they see the power of China beyond the borders of China, both in the sense of Chinese tech companies going abroad. We could use the example of Alibaba, acquiring Lazada, both in the sense that Western tech companies are starting to copy Chinese tech companies. If we look at YouTube, that is copying what Taobao is doing with live streaming. If we're looking at Facebook, that has just launched their Spotify collaboration, which is basically a WeChat mini program e-commerce. And so, but most importantly, I guess for a lot of our clients that are in retail, cosmetics, it's about the Chinese consumers. And they see that Chinese consumers are purchasing cross-border, they are going to travel abroad, and they are residing abroad. We have about 80 million Chinese overseas residents. There are some countries in the US, like in Palo Alto, where 2/3 of potential homeowners are Chinese. And so they have more in common with their family and their relatives living in China. They are used to using the Chinese apps, and they are, fundamentally Chinese. So I think they are trying to come here to understand how to better approach them and relate to them.
Excellent. A lot of so many things to unpack, and unfortunately we are almost at the end of our 45 minutes webinar. I would like to possibly conclude with a final question to each of you. If you had to share to the rest of the world what in your mind is innovation the Chinese way, how it is completing, defining, different, or actually the same thing as what you've observed abroad, and we can start probably with Marian, because he's looking at his shoes, and I always like to pick on.
Right. Thank you, Matthieu. I think it's all about the scale, and I just miss a little bit because the connection was not really stable for me. So just what Rachel already, Luyi said, right? That It's quite different what's happening here. This is the second stage that's happening, and we have more and more maturing the ecosystem at the moment. And then we see, just for example, that that in Shanghai we have over 600 incubators, and this is just enormous, like massive number of incubators. And lots of people saying this is the waste of time and resources. But I think this is kind of also a way to innovate, because that pretty much, if we talk about the startups, we have the more startups you have, the more successful cases you will have, right? So some of them fail, but then some of them will become successful because they learn and improve, right? Same thing we can apply to the incubators. And if we have 600 of them now, then maybe next year you will have 300 of them, and then 100 of them, and then you will have a structured and strong incubator, right? So what we see that what's happening, China learns its own way. It takes its own path. It's a completely different scale. But what we see is happening way faster, right? If you look at the Silicon Valley innovation, they started in 60s, 70s, right? It's been ready for quite a long time, they innovating. So for China, it's been already how many years? Like 20, 30 years of innovating. So China is taking different approach, but it's going faster just because of the scale. And that's, I think, one of the biggest differences what we see right here. So it's not burning resources or wasting time. It's just trying to find as fast as possible the right way for them to grow.
Thank you, Marian. Luyi, maybe the same question?
Yes. So maybe on top of what Marian had said, I think the biggest difference is like we like to collaborate, work with the industrial players, even if just have discussion of what is the strategy. For example, people who work in Alibaba or Tencent is working, what they can inspire you and how your product and service can bring new blood to them. I think it's already a good and first step. Choose the right partner. Second is like as a foreign startup, you have to be very close or at least familiar with local tech ecosystem, government policies, and don't do it by yourself. Choose a reliable Chinese located or Chinese backgrounded partner to help you understand the difference in working culture, a difference in how you manage relationships with Chinese people and Chinese businessmen. And I think this is very important to really get into that, let's say, center of business area. And the third, I would say, a big difference is also Chinese founders tend to link fundamental personal values to the ambitions of their startup journey. And they always start from, we can see a lot of startups coming from nowhere. They're not from a rich family. They have this ambition to change their life for themselves, to have a better quality of life. But then on the journey, they tend to understand actually what they do can bring much more values to the country, to the people as well. So I think this is also what motivates them to work more, work very hard. This is to themselves, to their family, and to the country, to the people. So I think these 3 points are quite different, fundamental, and very important to succeed in China market.
Thank you very much. And Rachel, the final words for the end?
Yeah, I would have then one word, which is ecosystem. Chinese entrepreneurs are ecosystem builders. They start with one product and then they build all the services around their product, and they build ecosystems that are mutually exclusive. So it's in that sense, it's extremely specific and extremely different to how it happens in the West.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and hearing what we had to say about innovation the Chinese way. There is a lot more to discuss about, so feel free to reach out to all of us on LinkedIn, WeChat, and everywhere. That's the end of it. Thank you again for participating, and see you around.